when David Mitchell publicly berated his pregnant wife at an upscale restaurant, calling her an embarrassment in front of dozens of diners. He thought he was untouchable. Then a man in an expensive suit walked through the door. The man she'd left behind years ago, the most dangerous man in Seoul. Emily Park Mitchell sat across from her husband at Aurelio's, one of Manhattan's most exclusive Italian restaurants, and tried to remember when she'd stopped feeling safe with him. She was 7 months pregnant, her belly prominent beneath the elegant maternity dress she'd chosen carefully for their 3rd wedding anniversary. The dress was navy blue, David's favorite color. She'd styled her long black hair the way he preferred. She'd even made sure to arrive exactly on time, not a minute early or late, because David hated when she disrupted his schedule. 3 years ago, she'd thought she was building the life she'd dreamed of. David Mitchell was a successful corporate lawyer at one of New York's most prestigious firms. He was American-born, stable, legitimate, everything her life in Korea hadn't been. When she'd met him at a charity gala, she'd seen an escape from the shadows of her past. The first year had been good. He'd been charming, attentive, proud to introduce her to his colleagues and friends. But after the wedding, something shifted. The charm became control. The attention became criticism. He complained about her accent, even though her English was perfect. He discouraged her from speaking Korean, even on the phone with her family. He made small comments about her appearance, her choices, her thoughts, until she found herself second-guessing everything. Now, 7 months pregnant with their first child, Emily walked on eggshells every single day. Tonight was supposed to be special, their anniversary. But David had been on his phone since they'd sat down, his jaw tight with irritation about something at work. Emily had learned to read his moods, to navigate around them like minefields. "The wine list is terrible here," David muttered, not looking up from his phone. "I don't know why you insisted on this place." David had made the reservation, but she'd learned that correcting him only made things worse. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, the automatic response that had become her default. "Whatever you choose will be fine." She reached for her water glass, her hand shaking slightly from the anxiety that had become her constant companion. And that's when everything fell apart. Emily's hand, slightly unsteady from the combination of pregnancy hormones and nerves, knocked against the water glass. It tipped over, water spreading across the white tablecloth and splashing onto the edge of David's suit jacket. Time seemed to slow down. David's head snapped up, his face transforming from irritation to fury in an instant. "Are you kidding me right now?" "I'm sorry, I didn't mean..." Emily reached for her napkin, trying to blot the water, her face flushing with embarrassment. "Of course you didn't mean to." David's voice was loud now, cutting through the quiet ambiance of the restaurant. Other diners were starting to turn and look. "You never mean to. You're just clumsy and careless and completely useless." Emily felt tears spring to her eyes. "David, please." "Please what?" He threw his napkin down on the table. "Please stop pointing out that you can't do anything right, that you're an embarrassment. Look at you. You can't even sit through one dinner without making a scene." A waiter approached nervously. "Sir, it's no problem at all. Let me just..." "We're fine," David snapped at him. The waiter retreated quickly. Emily's hands were trembling. Around them, she could feel the weight of dozens of eyes watching. An older woman at the next table was staring with obvious disapproval. At David or at her, Emily couldn't tell. A young couple near the window had stopped eating entirely, frozen in uncomfortable witness. "You know what the worst part is," David continued, his voice dripping with contempt. "I'm stuck with you now. You trapped me with this pregnancy, and now I have to deal with your incompetence for the rest of my life." Tears were streaming down her face now, and she couldn't stop them. She wanted to stand up, to leave, to disappear, but her body felt frozen, paralyzed by humiliation and the horrible familiarity of this dynamic. David's anger, her shame, her inability to defend herself. She'd left behind one dangerous situation in Korea only to find herself trapped in another kind of prison. Different bars, same cage. The restaurant door opened with a soft chime. Emily didn't look up. She was staring at her hands, at the engagement ring that suddenly felt like a shackle, trying to will herself to stop crying. But the atmosphere in the restaurant changed immediately, like the air pressure dropping before a storm. 3 men entered Aurelio's, and the energy of the room shifted in a way that was almost tangible. The man in front was in his early 30s, wearing a suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. It was perfectly tailored, charcoal gray with subtle pinstripes, paired with a black shirt and no tie. His presence commanded attention without effort, the kind of authority that came from power so absolute it didn't need to be announced. Behind him were 2 men, clearly security, their builds and the way they moved marking them as professionals. They flanked him at a respectful distance, their eyes constantly scanning the room. The maitre d' rushed forward immediately, his deference obvious. "Mr. Kang, we weren't expecting you this evening. Should I prepare your usual table?" The man, Kang, raised a hand in a subtle gesture that meant, "Not now." His eyes were moving systematically across the restaurant, dark and intense, searching for something. Or someone. Other diners who'd been watching Emily and David's argument quickly looked away, suddenly very interested in their own meals. There was something about this man that made people instinctively want to avoid his attention. Emily was still staring down at the table, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. She didn't see him enter, didn't see the moment his eyes found her, but she heard the sharp intake of breath from David. "Oh, hell," David muttered, his tone changing completely from righteous anger to something else, something that might have been nervousness. Min-Jae Kang's expression had been neutral when he entered, the carefully controlled mask of someone who lived in a world where showing emotion was weakness. But the moment he saw Emily, saw her tears, saw her pregnant and crying while a man sat across from her with contempt written across his face, that mask cracked, his jaw tightened. His eyes went cold in a way that made the temperature in the room seem to drop 10 degrees. He began walking toward their table, his movements controlled and predatory. His security detail followed, forming a subtle perimeter. The maitre d's who noticed his trajectory suddenly found reasons to look elsewhere. David's face had gone pale, and Emily, sensing the shift in the room, finally looked up. Her eyes met Min-Jae's across the restaurant, and her entire world stopped. "Emily, ah." Min-Jae's voice was soft, speaking Korean using the affectionate suffix that he'd called her years ago. But there was steel underneath the softness, and his eyes never left her face as he approached the table. "Are you okay?" Couldn't breathe. The last time she'd seen Min-Jae Kang was 3 years ago, in Seoul, when she'd walked away from him and everything he represented. When she'd left in the middle of the night with nothing but a suitcase and a desperate need to build a life that didn't involve looking over her shoulder. Min-Jae had been her first love. They'd met when she was 23, working as a translator for international business conferences. He'd been 27, already taking over his fa. Millie's business empire, an empire that had legitimate fronts but roots that ran deep into Seoul's underground power structure. She'd fallen for him hard and fast. He'd been magnetic, protective, generous with her in ways that had made her feel cherished. But she'd also seen the darkness, the violence that lurked beneath his controlled exterior, the dangerous world he operated in, the impossibility of having a normal life by his side. When she'd told him she was leaving for America, he'd tried to stop her. Not with force, he'd never used force with her, but with promises. That he'd keep her safe, that he'd give her anything she wanted, that she was the only person in the world who mattered to him. But Emily had wanted a different life, a normal life, marriage, children, suburban safety, not the constant tension of being connected to organized crime, even if that crime wore expensive suits and operated out of glass towers. So she'd left, changed her number, avoided mutual friends, built a new life in New York, and now here he was, standing in front of her table while she sat pregnant and crying with the safe husband who just called her useless in front of a room full of strangers. David stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Who the hell are you?" Min-Jae didn't even glance at him. His eyes were still on Emily, searching her face with an intensity that made her feel exposed. "Emily," he said again, still in Korean. Tell me this man didn't make you cry. But they both knew the answer. Her tears were still wet on her cheeks. Finally, Min-Jae turned to look at David, and the expression on his face made David take an involuntary step back. Min-Jae studied David with the same expression someone might use when examining something unpleasant on the bottom of their shoe. His gaze traveled from David's flushed face to his expensive but off-the-rack suit to his defensive posture, cataloging and dismissing him in seconds. "Is this how you treat your wife?" Min-Jae's English was perfect, barely accented. "Your pregnant wife. I don't know who you think you are, but this is a private conversation between me and my wife. You need to leave." A private conversation. Min-Jae's voice was soft, almost contemplative, in the middle of a restaurant, where you called her an embarrassment, where you made her cry in front of 50 people. He tilted his head slightly. "That kind of private. This is none of your business. Emily is my business." Min-Jae's voice didn't rise, but it cut through David's words like a blade. "She will always be my business. Min-Jae, please, don't." He glanced at her, and for just a moment the hardness in his face softened. "I'm not here to make trouble for you, but I'm not going to walk away while someone treats you like this either." His security had positioned themselves around the table, not threatening, but present. The message was clear. This situation was under Min-Jae's control now. The restaurant owner, the actual owner, not the maitre d', appeared from the back, moving quickly toward their table. He was a short Italian man in his 60s who'd probably seen everything in his decades running high-end restaurants. But when he saw Min-Jae, he stopped short. "Mr. Kang," he said, his tone carefully respectful. "Is everything all right? Can I be of assistance?" David's eyes darted between the restaurant owner and Min-Jae, starting to understand that this wasn't just some random guy who'd walked in off the street. "Everything's fine, Antonio," Min-Jae said pleasantly, "though I think this table might need some privacy. Perhaps you could ensure no one disturbs us for a few minutes?" Of course. Antonio gestured to his staff, who began quietly ushering other diners away from the nearby tables, offering them complimentary drinks at the bar. People went willingly, eager to be away from whatever was happening. David's face was getting redder. "Now wait just a minute. You can't just, I'll call the police." Min-Jae smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "Please do. Aha. V3 NYPD commissioners on speed dial. We can call them together if you'd like." David's confidence was crumbling visibly. He pulled out his phone anyway, his hand shaking slightly, trying to maintain some illusion of control. Min-Jae watched him with the patience of a cat watching a mouse run into a corner. "Before you make that call," Min-Jae said conversationally, "let me introduce myself properly. My name is Min-Jae Kang. I'm the CEO of Kang Corporation. We have holdings in real estate, technology, import-export, and private security across Asia and North America. Our New York office alone employs 300 people." He paused, letting that sink in. "My family has been in business for 3 generations. We've built relationships with everyone who matters in this city. Politicians, judges, police chiefs, and yes, even district attorneys." His smile sharpened. "Including the one your firm just lost a major case to last month, Thompson v. Sterling Industries. I believe you were second chair on that. How do you—" "I make it my business to know things." Min-Jae's voice was still pleasant, almost friendly, which somehow made it more menacing. "For instance, I know you've been passed over for partner twice at Whitman & Cross. I know your father's law firm went bankrupt when you were in college, which is why you're so obsessed with appearing successful. I know your condo in Tribeca is mortgaged to the ceiling and you're 3 months behind on payments." Emily stared at Min-Jae, then at David. She'd known none of this. David had always presented their finances as solid, had always been the one managing their accounts. "You have no right," David started. "I also know," Min-Jae continued, his voice dropping lower, "that you took out a life insurance policy on Emily 6 months ago, a large one, and that you've been talking to a divorce attorney on the side." He leaned forward slightly. "Makes a man wonder about your intentions toward your pregnant wife." Emily felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. David David couldn't meet her eyes. That's taken out of context. The insurance is normal. The insurance is double the recommended amount for someone in her situation, Min-Jae said flatly. And the divorce attorney specializes in cases where men want to avoid child support. The restaurant had gone completely silent. Even the staff had stopped moving. Min-Jae straightened, adjusting his cufflinks in a casual gesture that somehow felt threatening. So no, David Mitchell, I don't think I'll be leaving. And I don't think you'll be calling anyone. Min-Jae turned back to Emily and his expression transformed completely. Gone was the cold, dangerous businessman. In his place was the man she'd known years ago. The one who'd looked at her like she was the only person in the world who mattered. Emily, he said gently, still speaking in Korean so David couldn't understand. You don't have to stay with someone who treats you like this. You don't have to live like this. Min-Jae, I can't. Emily's voice broke. It's complicated. It's not complicated. His voice was firm but kind. You're in a situation that isn't safe. You're pregnant and vulnerable, and this man... He gestured dismissively at David without looking at him. He doesn't deserve you. He never did. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card, setting it on the table in front of her. I have an apartment building in the Upper East Side. I can have a fully furnished 2-bedroom ready for you tonight. Security, medical care, whatever you need. No strings attached. I don't want your charity, Emily said, her pride flaring despite everything. It's not charity, it's protection, for you and your baby. His eyes dropped to her belly, and something flickered across his face. Pain, maybe, or regret. Let me do this, please. David had been listening to this exchange in Korean without understanding the words, but understanding the tone perfectly. He moved suddenly, reaching across the table to grab Emily's wrist. Emily, let's go. We're leaving. Right now. He never finished the sentence. Min-Jae's hand shot out, gripping David's wrist with enough force that David gasped in pain. Min-Jae's security stepped forward immediately, their presence suddenly much more threatening. If you touch her again, Min-Jae said, his voice barely above a whisper but filled with such cold menace that Emily felt her blood run cold, you will lose the hand. Do you understand me? I will have it removed, surgically, if I'm feeling generous. Less carefully, if I'm not. The threat hung in the air, and everyone in the room knew it wasn't empty. David's face was white with pain and fear. You can't. This is assault. This, Min-Jae said calmly, releasing David's wrist, is a warning, which is more mercy than you deserve. He looked back at Emily. The choice is yours. It always has been. But if you stay with him, I need to know you're doing it because you want to, not because you're afraid or trapped. Emily looked at Min-Jae, then at David, then down at her hands resting on her pregnant belly. She could feel her daughter, she'd learned it was a girl just 2 weeks ago, moving inside her, responding to her mother's elevated heart rate. 2 men. 2 different kinds of danger. 2 different versions of being controlled. And suddenly, with perfect clarity, Emily realized she was done letting anyone else decide her life for her. She stood up, her movements careful and deliberate. Both men watch. Ed her waiting. Min-Jae, she said in Korean, her voice stronger than it had been all night. Thank you for caring. Thank you for wanting to protect me. But I left your world because I didn't want to be protected by violence. I wanted to be free. She turned to David, switching to English. And you. I loved you. I thought I was building a partnership, a family. But you spent 3 years tearing me down, making me small, making me doubt myself. Her voice wavered, but didn't break. I won't raise my daughter in a house where her father treats her mother like garbage. Emily, honey, let's talk about this at home. David started, his tone suddenly conciliatory now that he understood the danger he was in. No. The word came out firm and clear. I'm not going home with you. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. That depends on whether you're willing to change, to get help, to actually treat me like a partner instead of a possession. She looked at Min-Jae. I won't live in your world either. I can't, but her voice softened. I won't refuse help from someone who cares about me. Not anymore. I spent 3 years letting David isolate me because I was too proud to admit I needed support. She picked up Min-Jae's card from the table. I'm going to stay with my friend Jennifer tonight, but tomorrow I'd like to talk about options, about making sure my daughter and I are safe. Not about getting back together, she added quickly, seeing the hope flash across his face. We're not those people anymore, but maybe about building something new, a friendship, an understanding. Min-Jae nodded slowly. Whatever you need. I meant what I said. No strings attached. You call the shots, Emily. You always should have. She turned back to David one last time. I'm taking a taxi to Jen's. Don't follow me. Don't call me tonight. If you want to save this marriage, you'll give me space and you'll start figuring out how to be the man I thought I married. With that, Emily walked toward the door, her head high despite the tears still on her cheeks. David started to follow Emily, but Min-Jae stepped smoothly into his path. It wasn't aggressive, but it was absolute. David froze. She asked you not to follow, Min-Jae said quietly. I suggest you listen. She's my wife, David said, but there was no force behind it anymore. Just desperation. She's her own person, Min-Jae corrected. Something you seem to have forgotten. One of Min-Jae's security men had already moved to accompany Emily to the door, maintaining a respectful distance but ensuring she got to a taxi safely. Through the restaurant window, David and Min-Jae watched her slide into a yellow cab. Once the taxi pulled away, Min-Jae turned his full attention back to David. Let me be very clear about something. NG, he said, his tone conversational but his eyes hard as stone. I'm going to be watching you, not obviously, not intrusively, but I'll know if you harass her, if you threaten her, if you make her custody negotiations difficult. If you try to use the baby as leverage, you can't just... I can and I will. Min-Jae pulled out his own phone, tapped a few times, then showed David the screen. It was a dossier, David's entire financial history, employment record, even his browsing history. I have resources you can't imagine. I have people everywhere, and more than that, I have patience. He pocketed his phone. If Emily chooses to work things out with you, I'll respect that. I'll stay away. But if you hurt her again, if you make her cry again, if I find out you've done anything to make her life difficult, he smiled, and it was terrifying. You'll wish you'd only lost your job and your apartment. You'll wish that was the worst that happened to you. David was shaking now, all his earlier bravado completely gone. I could report you. This is extortion. Threats of violence. Go ahead, Min-Jae said pleasantly. I just had a conversation with a man in a restaurant. I'm concerned about my friend's welfare. There were dozens of witnesses who saw you verbally abusing your pregnant wife. Who do you think the police will be more interested in? Who stepped back? You're free to go, David. Go home. Think about the kind of man you want to be. Think about whether your pride is worth losing everything. Min-Jae walked back to his table, sat down and ordered dinner as if nothing had happened. David stood there for another moment, then grabbed his jacket and left the restaurant, his face burning with humiliation and fear. 2 months later, Emily stood in her new apartment on the Upper East Side, looking out at Central Park through floor-to-ceiling windows. The apartment was smaller than the place she'd shared with David, but it was hers, truly hers. She'd taken Min-Jae up on his offer, but on her terms. She was paying rent, albeit at well below market rate, which was the compromise they'd reached. He'd arranged for security in the building, but it was discreet, professional. He'd offered her a position at Kang Corporation's marketing department, but she'd declined. She wanted to build something of her own. David had contested the divorce at first, tried to make things difficult, but after his law firm mysteriously lost 2 major clients in 1 week and his mortgage company suddenly demanded full payment, he'd become much more cooperative. Emily suspected Min-Jae's involvement, though he'd never confirmed it when she'd asked. The divorce was nearly finalized now. David would have visitation rights when the baby was born, under supervised conditions at first. He'd started therapy, according to his lawyer. Whether it would actually change him, Emily didn't know. But that was his journey now, not hers. She heard a soft knock on her door. When she opened it, there was a delivery person holding an enormous bouquet of white roses and pink peonies. The card read simply, "For a healthy delivery and a bright future, MJ." Emily smiled. Min-Jae had been true to his word. He'd kept his distance, respecting her boundaries, but made sure she knew he was there if she needed him. They'd had coffee twice, carefully neutral meetings in public places where they'd talked about her plans, her family, everything except what they'd once been to each other. 1 week later, Emily gave birth to a healthy baby girl. She named her Grace Ji-hyun, an English name and a Korean one, representing both parts of who Emily was, who she'd always been. The day after she came home from the hospital, another delivery arrived. Not flowers this time, but a small box with another card. "She has her mother's strength. You both deserve the world. I'll be here, watching from a distance, making sure you always have what you need. That's what love looks like now, MJ." Inside the box was a silver necklace with a small pendant, a mother and child intertwined. Korean characters were engraved on the back. Chayu, freedom. Emily, hell. Dee, her daughter, close, and looked out at the city spread below her. She'd left one dangerous situation and escaped another. She'd found her voice, her strength, her ability to choose herself. She had Min-Jae watching over her from the shadows, but she wasn't dependent on him. She had her family reconnecting with her now that David wasn't isolating her. She had her daughter, her future, her freedom. And most importantly, she had herself. Some women are saved by men. Some women save themselves. Emily had done both, accepted help when she needed it, but never surrendered her agency, her choice, her right to determine her own life. That was real strength, not the violence Min-Jae was capable of, not the control David had tried to exert, but the quiet, unbreakable strength of a woman who'd finally learned her own worth. She looked down at Grace, asleep in her arms, and made a promise. "No one will ever make you small," she whispered. "No one will ever make you doubt yourself. I'll teach you to be strong enough to accept help when you need it, and brave enough to walk away when you don't. You'll never have to choose between being safe and being free." Outside somewhere in the city, Min-Jae received a text. Just 2 words. "Thank you." He smiled, saved the message, and went back to his work. Watching over her would be enough. It would have to be. Because loving someone sometimes means giving them the space to become who they're meant to be, even if it's without you.